Pleasure to have everybody on board tonight. I am Carl Levier. I'm the founder at Minds Matter. I'm joined by Michael Bunting. My background is in psychometric. I'm a workplace psychologist, and I used to do a lot of psychometrics at the beginning of my career a long time ago. And I stopped doing that because I felt it was branding people and sort of limiting them in being who they were seeing, and there was an etiquette to them. What I love about this body of work, it has much more depth to it and allows us to get really to the unconscious. It allows us to unleash the potential for behavioral change. So some of you may be aware of Robert Keegan's work. It's a really popular book called Immunity to Change, in which he explains why people don't change behaviors that easily. And we really need to get into the world of the unconscious to get there. So I think that is a huge part of what Mike will talk about tonight. And it is juxtaposed with the best leadership behaviors out there right now that have been proven through countless research. So on that note, I was giving that little intro to continue welcoming people as you flow in. I will pass on to Michael to maybe just give us a bit of intro on yourself.
It's been an incredible journey with this work of trying to bring in really deep transformational work, deeper and deeper transformational work into organizations, but still make it really practical, cynical proof, and also simple enough to still create scale change. The history of my work personally, 25 years in this field, I wrote my first book with Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner, who wrote the series of books called The Leadership Challenge, arguably the world's most researched leadership model, more academic studies done on independent academic studies done it on any other on earth. And then The Mindful Leader 2016 is an attempt to create more depth of understanding of mindfulness, take it out of the world of stress management or health management and into all the whole magnificent practice of mindfulness and integrate it deeply with leadership and the process of leading and transforming. And then Vertical Growth, which I wrote with Carl, was trying to answer the question, what are the essentials to change? Like, I love the simplicity of and the elegance of Robert Keegan's Immunity to Change work, but having a long background in mindfulness and depth work, we're recognizing things like your ability to cope with emotional distress is as or more significant than your uncovering cognitive belief systems, your ability to define yourself by a set of values or knowing what you stand for, also a really, really crucial part of the transformational journey. Your ability to self-regulate, is also another crucial part of the transformational journey. It's quite a sophisticated process. It can feel simple intellectually, transformation, but it's not simple at all, particularly for the nervous system, particularly for our awareness. So here's the simple building blocks that I'll take you through. So let's just start with this first statement: behavior drives outcomes. I recount a story now when I present this, that we work with a client in Europe who achieved an incredible turnaround. They went from $240 million loss to profit in 3 years. And when I asked the CEO, what do you attribute the success to? He said discipline. And when we unpacked that further, it was really obvious that discipline, he's talking about a set of behaviors, that they had a set of behaviors that we would call non-discipline or entitlement in the business, and he changed the behaviors to more disciplined behaviors. And it just reminded me of this statement: behavior drives outcomes. And behavior is really the core thing that we have choice over, assuming we have enough awareness. Behavior drives outcomes not only in teams, in organizations, it also drives outcomes in marriages. It drives outcomes in our parenting. Behavior is a much bigger thing, I think, that we probably all of us consider. And then we ask the secondary question in organizations: okay, if behavior drives outcomes, let's begin with what outcomes are we trying to achieve in our organizations and in our business. And we posit that there's 3 outcomes. There's what we call a triple goal. The first outcome, when you think about your own business, right, or the business you're in, and you're thinking about improving it or working on it, I would propose to you that you're thinking of one or all 3 of these things. You're thinking of how to improve the performance of your business. So how to improve, if you're for profit, the profitability, the profit margin, the customer retention rate, the customer approval rate, right? You're trying to do something that equals performance in your business. The second, or your nonprofit is the same. You want better impact. You're trying to improve impact on what your services are. Great learning, of course, you want it to be agile and inventive and transformational and innovative. You want to keep up or reinvent your products faster than those around you so that you can sustain performance over the long run. And of course, you also want happy people. You want a great workplace, right? You want a meaningful, great workplace. So when we think about it in organizations, large organizations that we tend to work with, they even measure those two things. Most of the clients we work with, people's performance rating and their annual bonus, for example, is dependent on their performance rating and their workplace engagement score that they're getting, right? Which is the great workplace. Those two really matter. The innovation learning part kind of ties the two together. It's harder to measure, but of course it's extremely significant. And then, so that's what we define when we're thinking of outcomes. Everything else we do in this webinar, you'll see, is all about how do we improve those outcomes in a very direct, clear way. Historically, when we do training or leadership development, organizational development, it's very hard to define what is the outcome. You know, are we trying to get people to say, oh, I'm really happy, I loved your program? Are we trying to get a better engagement score? For many years, we were really successful in helping our clients get better engagement scores and become great workplace. But we recognized there was a study done about 5 years ago that declared that 25% of your highest engaged people are also your lowest performers. So actually, engagement does not necessarily translate into high performance. We need to be much more direct about it.
Michael, quick intervention here. Another study you've brought to our attention is the one from Harvard Business that shows that we've had movements. We've had people putting a lot of emphasis on performance. We had a lot of people putting emphasis on showing up in a nice way, getting engagement. We know both of those do deliver higher results, but when you combine them together, so when we're able to hold what you're putting here, it's from 10% better leadership to 68% when you actually combine all of this together. And do you want to comment that? Because that's why I find this is so important to talk about these three parallel.
I'm going to comment to that in a minute, if you don't mind, when we do the show, the 5 behaviors. What Carl's talking about is that we're starting to understand now that, and some things that many of you probably know already, that the best leaders are a strange paradox of driving results and also deeply emotionally intelligent, both together. And just being emotionally intelligent and kind doesn't actually drive good outcomes, and just being driven on results also doesn't drive great outcomes. The best leaders, by exponential, do both well, and it's also why we measure both as an outcome. And then we look. This is a very simple framework, but we spend a lot of time on this because we see our client. It takes quite a while to absorb this really simple slide. This only took us 25 years to get to, by the way. This really one simple slide. Then we've got behavior. So if behavior drives outcomes, okay, those are the outcomes. There are behaviors that actually don't. They negatively impact those outcomes. They are typically innocuous. They're death by 1,000 cuts. They're invisible. So we often ask our clients, when you have an ineffective meeting, for example, and you don't discuss the real issues in your meeting, does someone walk out that meeting and say, that cost us $10,000? No, because behavior, unfortunately, and behaviors that reduce performance, learning, engagement are often not directly seen or measured. So we have to become very conscious of them if we're going to actually do something about them. And that's what we, in our language, call a red zone, right? And they are typical, but I'll give you an easy example of this. A typical red zone behavior would be sugarcoating feedback. Right? And by the way, when we work with clients, they typically come up with 20 to 50 red zone behaviors in their organization. There's so many of these behaviors. But we just take sugarcoating feedback, not giving people the honest truth, right? Difficult feedback. How does that impact performance? How does that impact learning? How does that impact great workplace? It's really obvious when you juxtapose it or you compare it against, oh yeah, that behavior actually doesn't drive what we're looking for. Right. If that behavior doesn't drive what we're looking for, why are we doing it? And why aren't we changing it? That's the red zone. And then the green zone, just keeping it very simple, the green zone are typically the values of the organization, sometimes not, but they are the behaviors. If we had to codify it, we'd say what are the behaviors we as a team or an organization need to be great at to drive performance, learning, and great workplace? What we find in most of the clients we begin to work with, they've got organizational values, but they're not connected to the outcomes. They're like a brand or like something on a wall or something in a website. Oh, here's our values. But we say, okay, can you explain how those are strategic levers to drive performance, agility, and engagement? Until you can do that, they're never going to be taken as seriously as they should be. So that's the framework. I'm hoping that makes sense to everyone. It's very simple framework. Why do we define the red zone for organizations collectively and individually? Because those of you who know adult development, what you cannot see, you cannot outgrow, you cannot overcome. So it's quite some exercise when clients begin to list out the red zones and then prioritize which ones are damaging our organization the most.
Wouldn't mind kicking in here, Michael, just add another element, because you talked about the organizational values, which often just end up hanging up on the wall, as you've often mentioned. But I think what's interesting here to mention is that we also get leaders to tap into their own values and really understand which ones they stand for, which ones they want to grow. And I remember seeing a study that showed at one point that leaning into your own values is even more impactful than somebody who's fully embracing the organizational values. So maybe, I don't know if you have anything to say about that dual level of understanding values.
Yes, I'll come to, I did an incredible exercise with my own wife about 5 days ago. We did an exercise called what is your dream for our marriage? And it really is, it was like a green zone thing. It's like, what is our intent? What are the core set of things that really matter to us? Have we co-defined that? And we've been married 13 years and we've never actually defined that, right? It's like, okay, this is what I teach on a daily basis. It's creating that intentional definition of what great looks like and then cultivating it. Now, on a fateful conversation, I don't know how long ago it was, Carl, we began to shift this into a matrix structure, right? And this is the basis of that book there that Carl and I wrote. And I'll hand over to Carl. Carl, I'll cue it up for you, and then if you can explain, I'll just actually do the whole thing and I'll let you explain this in terms of what we've just shared with you, right?
So what the conversation Michael and I had at the time was around leadership development. And I had brought up a passion of mine, and quite honestly, that was based on my own personal development at the time. I was retraining as a psychotherapist and looking at the most impactful modalities to change behaviors. And something called acceptance commitment therapy at the time was very prevalent and very impactful for myself in my own life. And I was saying, Michael, we got to bring that into leadership. And what this research and this, I would say, the most empirical, one of the more impactful psychological approaches right now for psychologists is this cognitive behavioral approach, where we render on the right-hand side the kind of behaviors and the aspirations that we have as a leader. So the clearer we are on where we want to be going as a leader, the more chance that we have in doing that. Now, that's nothing new. Most leadership training development go in that direction. On the left-hand side, we have those behaviors that are under the hood, the ones that we don't really see that are driving us away, what Michael spoke about a bit earlier, the ones that we don't, that show up in meetings, those behaviors that move us away from that triple goal, those need to be unleashed. Those need to be brought into obviousness. They need to be brought from the unconscious to consciousness. Now, what this model shows us is we're moving towards the right, we're moving away from the left. On top, we have what's observable. We want things to be behaviorally based. Only, as Michael spoke about earlier, behaviors drive outcomes. So we can't just have intention. Now, at the bottom, we do need to start from intention, and we do need to understand the beliefs that are driving those behaviors. So it's the model that moves us towards where we want to go in a very explicit and very sharp and focused way, and a model that really allows to unleash that immunity to change by bringing the unconscious conscious. The reason we're talking about green and red, or slower brain and fast brain, is all this is based in neuropsychology. And we know that the red side, the fast brain, is that limbic system. It's 95, some have it to 99% automatic behaviors. They're all conditioned to allow us to navigate life with the minimum effort, and the ones that has protected us so far, given our mammalian background. On the right-hand side, that's the prefrontal cortex. That's the higher executive functions. Those are the ones operate a little less fast, nanoseconds less fast, because they are able to look at all the environment and play out the game the way it should be played in light of the new variables. So in a nutshell, and Michael, please backfill, but this is the growth matrix we work with.
So I'll just put a little bit more color to this. It's just a simple diagram. We wanted it simple because we're typically working in scaling things right through an organization, and you want low ambiguity and real crystal clarity. When we talk about red zone behaviors, we actually contrast them or connect them to outcomes. So we go, which are the behaviors that are getting in the way most of my performance, learning, and engagement outcomes? What behaviors do we need to cultivate on the right-hand side that will have the most positive impact on performance, learning, and engagement, right? That it's always contrasted. Like, how do we decide which red zone behaviors are there? It's not a personal choice in the sense of, oh, I think I want to work on X. No, it's what are the behaviors that are affecting outcomes the worst? What behaviors will change the outcomes for the best? Then when we look at the unseen drivers on the bottom left, for those of you who have a therapy or a deeper inner work background, this can be the world of trauma. This can be the world of all the deeper inner work that we do when we're working in shadow work, or Carl Jung's shadow work. But of course, trauma work is not necessarily that safe to do in organizations. In fact, it's not safe to do. So this is where we lean on Robert Keegan's simple frameworks around immunity to change, because it's cognitive, it's not emotional. And yet we also need to acknowledge that change is heavily influenced by our ability to regulate pain, emotional pain. We have a person here in Australia, Alessa Nagnostakis, who's done her PhD in adult development. And her PhD research discovered that the only thing that determines whether people grow as adults or not is not actually the cognitive understanding. It's our relationship with feelings, our relationship with emotional pain. And when we look at our red zone behaviors, almost always an attempt to mitigate emotional pain in a reactive way, whether that be numbing or shutting down, or whether that be angry and acting out. And then on the bottom right, when we look at that, we just to give you some sense of it, one of my personal favorite questions we've asked for about 10 years now is, do leaders need to walk the talk? And everyone agrees, yes, they do. We say, okay, great. Well, can you describe, please, the talk that you're trying to walk? And usually you now get about 5 out of 100 people who can answer that question. And then we ask the question, well, how's that talk been influencing your behavior the last couple of weeks? Where have you failed? We're testing, is it a living thing? And now we typically get to about 1 out of 100, which is an astonishing figure. And then you look to adult development theory and you see it becomes obvious why. Because the person, we want people to internally reference what they stand for, not externally validate or survival needs with the lower levels of adult development. So we include that body of work as well in the bottom right? What do you stand for, such that you become that balanced leader, such that you can manage both your needs for attachment and care and authenticity and integrity? That deep balance work is in there. And in the center of the circle is, of the matrix, is self-awareness and self-regulation. Over the years, we've come to differentiate the two. I don't know if you guys have ever met people who declare that they're self-aware and they know their patterns, but they keep playing out their patterns. They keep on acting out their patterns, even though they're self-aware. So we will say self-awareness is not enough. It's not good enough. We need to self-regulate. And that's a different skill set than just self-awareness. We not only need to know our red zone patterns, we need to be able to own them and then regulate into the green. And that's central. The whole process of growth is dependent on that. And we had 2 different studies. One where we had 277 leaders, 5 different multinational companies. They gave us their confidential performance ratings of those people, the actual ones they used to determine bonuses and hirings and firings and all those kinds of things. And we also assessed all 277 leaders on our circle assessment. And this is what the profile looks like of the high performers, medium performers, and low performers, right? So what it's saying to us is that the higher the performance, the higher the green zone. Performance outcomes, not just leadership effectiveness. What we found really humbling in the last 6 months, we measure leadership effectiveness in our work, but we also measure performance outcomes. They are very often mismatched, that people are rated as highly effective leaders and their teams are performing averagely in an average way. So we've come to really see that leadership effectiveness is not a reliable measurement. Performance outcomes are a far more robust or meaningful measurement with leadership. And we often find that emotionally intelligent leaders who are kind and lovely get very high leadership effectiveness scores and low performance scores. And it's a frustration we've constantly gotten from clients. Our leaders are improving. They seem to be more green zone, but why is performance not going higher? Yes, well, it seems to be we're measuring the wrong thing as the outcome. And now we've begun to change that. And then we correlated the outcomes on these 3 key elements, so on a bigger database of leaders. And so what we're seeing is that the green zone correlates with basically 50%, great learning and agility 46.5%, and great workplace 42.3%. Suffice to say, there's an incredibly strong correlation between the more you green, the higher your performance, innovation, and engagement ratings go. All right, so I'll just stop there. If there are any quick, I've just showed you guys a lot, right? I'll just revise it, right? Behavior drives outcomes. What are the outcomes we're trying to receive? We're not even interested in leadership effectiveness. The outcome we're interested in is better performance, better learning, agility, and better workplace engagements, right? People are happier, healthier, right? That's what we're really interested in. We've got behaviors that drive negatively those outcomes, and we've got behaviors that drive those outcomes. The work of leadership or culture change is about reducing red, increasing green. Is that data-based? Yes, it is. Within red and green, there are unseen drivers. There's a force beneath, right? So if I'm sugarcoating feedback, I may have belief systems that if I'm honest, I'll lose relationships, right? Or I'll become less effective. There's those beliefs. I also might have to travel incredible discomfort, emotional discomfort, to move into more and more honesty. And I may have to manage those. And then I might have to answer for myself, what are my deepest values here? And if one of them happens to be integrity, I begin recognizing that when I'm in the red, I'm actually not in integrity. So not only am I now doing an organizational project, I'm also doing a very personal development project, what we call intrinsically motivated. That's effectively how we're putting the structure together. There's a lot of effort on crafting really good development practices and processes. We've also found that rituals are really significant. I mean, the last 5 years has been a learning curve for us as an organization, that organizational rituals and individual rituals are incredibly significant. They're every bit as significant as behavior change.
It'd be great to hear any questions, comments, reactions from what Michael has said so far, and then we'll just move on.
You talked about your 3 main points of performance, learning, and workplace. How do you make sure that everybody is online with the same definition of what is performance? That you don't fall into my definition of performance is numbers, or my definition of performance is so-and-so. Same thing with learning. Some people can learn and you just leave it at the cognitive level and you have a lot of knowledge, but how is that impacting the workplace, or how is that impacting your development or the organization's development? To what degree do you go into the defining what is, so that everybody is aligned?
We always go for what's measurable as possible, and unifying, if you will. So we typically start in organizational context. We will typically start with the executive team, and we will ask them, what are the numbers you need? So the performance is a number. It's usually a financial number. It could be a sales target number, but it's a number that the team get behind and say, that's what collective success looks like to us. Usually it's collective, right? And then everyone, do we have existing measurement systems that go beyond that? For some clients, it could be revenue growth at that particular point. For some, it could be profit margin. For some, it could be getting their customer ratings up. It just depends on the client, but we give them a lot of space and time. The second or the third one, great workplace, is pretty easy to measure, because most, maybe not smaller organizations, harder to do with smaller organizations, what is a great workplace? Like for our own organization, it's more of a descriptor. It's a connected community where we can share with each other. We feel like we belong. It's more flowery, right, as a description, but it means something to us, and that's fine. But larger organizations, it's typically the discipline measurement of literal great work. They'll do a great place to work survey or whatever the latest different company they use to measure. And it also includes mental health. So we try and make it include mental health. Like we would propose that from a mental health perspective, that a workplace should be a net positive on your mental health. That's what we try and get clients to see. So in other words, we don't need mental health and well-being programs here, because the way we work, the way we deliver our goals is so healthy. It's so green zone that actually it's just a great workplace. And we don't need band-aids constantly, to fix our difficult workplace. That's the goal. The hardest of those three to define is the great learning. Really hard, because it's typically not an outcome, it's a process. Some clients will measure it by innovation outcomes. So one of our clients, for example, is in coal mining in Australia, and they wanted to become more metals mining that are for sustainable technologies, right? They wanted to shift. So they would measure their performance score by obviously their revenue, but they would measure the percentage of their mining in coal versus metals as their transformational goal. That's often how it gets measured and are we transitioning fast enough and learning new skills and learning ourselves into a new market? For people like ourselves, we've defined it as in small businesses, what we call harvesting, processing, and implementing learning. Do we have an effective system in our business to harvest the learnings we're getting from all of our partners delivering the content around the world, our own thing in a systematic way? Do we have a systematic way of taking that learning, doing something with it, and then implementing improvements? So we measure it as a process, not an end goal per se. It's a complex question that we spend a lot of time with on clients, by the way.
I wouldn't mind adding a few elements in there because it's so critical. Deb, thanks. The question is really relevant. Because not only is it designed at the leadership level, as Michael just defined it, but then each leader cascades that for his own triple goal. So when he or she's going through their 360, they will identify what the triple goal is for their area of wherever that is. And conversations occur with their teams, and that gets debriefed. So what's most important, I think what's innovative in this approach to 360 is that there's a conversation going on around triple goal. It's being cascaded down, not only from the senior team down to the leader and his team or her team, and then regularly throughout the process, they're being reminded that the behavioral change is to move the needle on that triple goal. So that's just having that conversation is already super helpful because it reminds them why they're in this development program, why they're trying to shift a or a few behaviors that they've identified as the most impactful ones. So maybe just an added element there.
Deborah, can I just say one more thing that I think will be helpful for you? In the brave transition, it was scary for us. It was about 5 years ago where we fully transitioned into the triple goal methodology. The most pivotal conversation I had around this was we were working with a leader of 10 major markets in a very big global company, and we would still base this on more engagement scores at that time, and we were transitioning towards triple goal, and we actually fully transitioned halfway through this program. This particular leader's one big practice, if you're familiar with that idea of adult development, one big practice, her practice was listening. And we began to become brave enough to ask the question, so what? I said, her name is Taurus. Taurus, so what if you're listening better? How's that going to move performance? How's that going to move innovation in your team? And we couldn't believe how much more powerful that question was. And then now we actually measure it. And her practice evolved to a much more sophisticated practice than just listening. It became questioning the right particular questions, supporting people in the right way to innovate and so forth. And it was like, all right, what are we trying to do here? We're not just about behavior change. We're trying to get better outcomes.
First, it starts off by getting to know thyself, whether you're an organization or whether you're a leader, whether you are an employee base, but it's that, and that is why it will be so pertinent and important to each organization. It's not a big giant model, but each will define on their own and measure on their own. Hence, knowing who you are, what you stand for, those values, these things that you want to drive, the behavior that you really want to be conscious of and move forward, not just involve all kinds of behaviors to get to the goal. Anyway, so thank you for that. That was beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. And Darius, other thing worth saying is that, if we take a pragmatic view of where adults are in their development, we say, why would people do behavior change work or growth work? Some people are just intrinsically motivated, but actually doesn't seem to be the majority of people. So what we think of is, if we're an organization and we want to have reduced red and increased green, we want to do it at scale, for example. Now we do it in small pockets, but at scale, then we have to put pressure into the system, right? Pressure and support. But what we're very, very clear on is that that person who's doing the development work is aligned with their boss. What does great look like for me in my role? So that if they do the development work, the behavior change work, and it all maps together, the boss and them agree, if I do less of this and more of this, it should drive these better outcomes. And then it actually happens, it furthers their career. It's not just development for its own sake. It actually rewards their career and it rewards the business outcomes. So let's just quickly talk a little bit more about the red zone. The red zone is really interesting, and I haven't given much detail in these. Unfortunately, the slide's a bit small, but you'll see there's 3 fundamental outcomes, and especially if you're into the human development journey, we were very, very insistent that we bring a lot of compassion and compassionate work into the red zone, that it becomes non-judgmental, because the more we judge the red zone, judging people is red zone. So more red zone on red zone doesn't create green zone, right? So we were very clear that, and when we mapped the red zone, we put these 3 key things that people want beneath the red zone behavior. They want approval, which is another word for love and belonging and acceptance. They want control, which is another word for autonomy and freedom. And they want security and safety, right? So all the red zone behaviors are ultimately driven to achieve these fundamental outcomes. The thing that's so interesting about the red zone behaviors is they don't work. And one of the red zone behaviors is self-promoting, right? For those of you who know the Enneagram, type 3, my type. So, and I use this example as how self-defeating red zone behaviors can be. When I did the beginning of this introduction, I talked about the books that I've written. That is a pure act of self-promotion. That's me saying, look, I've done some important work at some level, right? Now, that would have earned 1 of 3 responses for you. More approval, less approval, or neutral, right? However, what would be absolutely guaranteed to earn you less approval is if I kept on telling you how good I am and how good my books are and how amazing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I kept on telling you, if I kept on self-promoting, does it make sense that I will lose your approval? It's almost guaranteed. So isn't it interesting that the act of self-promoting can work a little bit, but the more I do it, it stops working and it becomes working against me. And this is what's so interesting. If you look at this research here, high-performing leaders still do a bit of red zone, right? A little bit of red zone. That's a score, that's 49th percentile here, but it's a raw score of about 3 out of 10, actually. It's pretty low. So, and another example of this is defensiveness. One of the other behaviors we measure is defensiveness. If I'm defensive, I think I'm protecting myself, right? But if my client's giving me feedback and I'm being defensive, am I protecting myself? Am I protecting my company and my career? No. If you know John Gottman's work on marriage, he'll tell you that defensiveness is one of the 4 horsemen. It's one of the 4 things that guarantees kills marriage. But when people are being defensive in their marriages, I don't suppose they think they're destroying their marriage. They probably think they're protecting themselves and feeling good at the time. So all of these red zones behaviors are fascinating in that they have an innocent intention. They have a deep desire to meet things we all need, and yet they don't actually work. And you look at them in the cold light of day, they don't deliver on their promise. And we try and we present that in a way of, is there a better way to get that need met, for example, right? That's the green zone. It's a healthier way or a more constructive way. And Carl and I have had long conversations around the dance between deep inner work, if those of you do psychotherapy work, red zone doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't arrive by accident. Yes, it has cognitive belief systems. Yes, there's immunity change in it, but there's also usually a pretty big amount of emotional distress that's in and around red zone behaviors, and we have to deal with that too. So how does it correlate? And then we'll come back to questions. Again, all negative, strong negative correlations, right? So, for performance, learning, and great workplace. So the data is telling us pretty clearly, if you want to guarantee lower performance in the long run, lower learning and lower workplace engagement, a red zone is good. Now, there's one particular red zone that is more damaging, it seems, than all the other. There's 13 red zone behaviors. And you'll see it here in this diagram here. I know you probably can't read this, but this third one here to the bottom is, is defensiveness. What's really interesting is that defensiveness is, one of the higher scores for low performers. But if you look at high performers, it's the lowest score. And that's really, and that backs up the data, right? So in other words, because when we looked at adult development or growth, we have this simple principle. For people to grow, the most important thing, there's three key things. The ability to see objectively my behavior, objectively not be lost in it, is fundamental. But the other fundamental thing is to be able to own it and not defend and justify that behavior. And we are all PhD levels, in my view, at defending our behavior. By example, like, when I remember one day shouting at my son when he hadn't tidied up in the kitchen. And this is when he was 14 years old. And he said to me, "Dad, I accept any reasonable consequences for not doing my part in the house. I'm just not accepting your bad behavior now, Dad." And and I was about to say to him, "The only reason I'm shouting at you is because you didn't tidy up in the kitchen." That's an example of defensiveness and how subtle and deep it can go. I'm literally blaming my child for my red zone behavior. And so we do a lot of work on genuine ownership and all that involves around coping with the pain of ownership. But if you can't own, you cannot grow. It's really that simple in our view. And so it's so interesting to see, this is brand new data 3 days ago, that the highest performers are the least defensive by a long way. And it's their least red zone, which is also super interesting. Whereas the lowest performers, defensiveness is high, but it's as high as others as well. We rate 39 red zone statements. We asked the question, what are the 5 most negative, impactful red zone statements at the moment? And we measure 3 statements per area, 3 times 30, 3 times 13, 39 statements. All 3 defensive statements made the top 5. As in, if you really want to be a not effective leader or not get good outcomes, defensiveness is your friend. If you want good outcomes, defensiveness is not your friend, right? That's basically saying these 3 kinds of defensiveness we measure. We also see that being aggressive, which is the second one, is not useful. And then what's increasingly happening in our research is this reactive behavior. Now, we don't measure reactive as emotionally reactive. For us, reactive is panic-based reactive. It's fear-based reactivity, right? For protection, for safety. And it turns out it's chaotic and lacking prioritization. When we did this research about 12 months ago, we did not see reactivity in the top 5. We also didn't see in the green zone having disciplined priorities in the top 5. We're now seeing it. So I think as the world of the pace of change is increasing in our organizations, there's ever more need to create disciplined priorities and to withstand the temptation to react and move. And we're seeing more and more of our clients doing this. If you've read Jim Collins' book called How the Mighty Fall, it turns out that reactivity of the 13 red zones is the one that kills business the fastest. And yet many clients are caught in it. It's really interesting. This is incredibly interesting research. What happens when you do this well? This is wonderful work that Lucianne and Carl did with Sanofi Canada. They did all 3 things well. Sorry, Carl, I'll just quickly wrap this up with time. Carl should be speaking to this because he did this. But within 12 months, they increased their sales by 17%. Their drug launches were 400% higher than business case. This is key. See, they streamlined their priorities from 22 to 7 because they recognized too many priorities was a red zone of theirs. And that was a green zone to be disciplined with priorities. And their engagement score was 6 out of 10 for 5 straight years, and it went to 8.4 out of 10. So it's a 40% improvement in 12 months. It's just phenomenal what happens when organizations do all 3 correct. And this is one of our wonderful Canadian, given you guys are in Canada, Canadian case studies. They won the bronze award for the sales award, not a leadership award, not a culture change award. Sanofi run a competition where they go, what did you do this year to improve sales? And Sanofi Canada said, we ran a leadership program, development program, culture change program. They were the only submission that did that. Everyone else, it was very direct sales strategies, but just showing that this actually works if you get it right.
Okay. To add to this case study, Michael, what was beautiful to see is working with the executive team, we just had really human conversations. So we were able to express those red zones. People were able to say, these are my unconscious behaviors. I didn't realize I'm doing that. These are the drivers. This is why I've been doing it for so many years, because it's serving at one point, it's no longer serving. So there were really human conversations at the executive level. And that transposed its way down to their teams. That's what's driving me personally in this kind of work, is to really bring more humanity into organizations. And that's what I find the beauty of this tool. That's why I was excited to present it tonight. I think Michael did a brilliant job in putting this together. Now let's open up. Yes,
We
please,
also had
Michael.
some really interesting, just so you're aware, that matrix we showed you doesn't just apply at an individual level, it applies at an organizational level. It's very interesting. Where there's collective red zone behaviors, there's also collective drivers of those red zones. Where there's collective absence of green, when you bring the values into real context, they become actually of use to antidote your red and increase your green to increase your triple goal. That's what happened. So I think it also lends itself to really deep conversations of what exactly is driving these red zone behaviors in our organization. What are the assumptions? What are the beliefs? What are the reward systems? What are the rituals that are actually driving these red zones? Because if we don't shift those, we will not shift anything.
You mentioned the evaluation Michael just presented, the assessment is for the leader and his team or her team. There's another assessment that I think is worth mentioning. It's a team assessment. So when you want to consolidate the leadership team, it has the same kind of logic behind it, but looking at team dynamics more than the individual dynamics. So that's a complementary instrument that we haven't presented. Now let's open up. If there's one or two questions, it'd be a pleasure to hear you, because I feel we get a lot of nice nuances when the questions show up.
Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation. I really appreciate this time you guys have taken. I just wanted to take a moment to maybe point to that massive pink elephant in the room. And I'm wondering how this model might have been impacted by or adapted to the phenomenal rise of technology, particularly AI, in terms of how this is being perceived now. Because the landscape seems to have changed dramatically with capacities.
Yeah. We have a, Pascal, I can answer that anecdotally, not more generally. What we've seen in our clients with AI is that they're becoming more chaotic, right? There's a panic happening in organizations, and then there's this burn of overwork, right? And then there's this chaos, and it's not serving them. So it's the response to the AI, because the AI is a crisis moment, let's face it, particularly for technology companies. And we have a few technology clients where there's the sense of AI is amazing, but if we're not first, we're dead. And then there's this huge panic in the business, right? And so what we're seeing is that it's red zone. They're not actually implementing as actively or as consciously as they could. And we literally got feedback yesterday from a tech client on this. And then we're redrafting their matrix, and we're going to represent it back to the CEO again, who's done the work, going, this is hurting us at the moment. This is not helping us. It's about balance. So I think what we're seeing, at least, is human behavior is human behavior, and that's what we're measuring. So AI or no AI doesn't really matter. But what the AI is presenting is so much disruption, and then it's then creating a lot of damaging behaviors. And so the question we see for organizations is, how do I most effectively navigate AI behaviorally? That's the question we're trying to help them answer, right? And what does great look like? And how can we still be disciplined and still be prioritizing and still empowering people even through this transition? Because it's recognizing the client, for example, literally I got extra data this morning just before this presentation, is that the staff are starting to burn out. They're starting to disengage. They're starting to become deeply defeatist, right? And the primary reason is reactivity in the red zone, and is unhinged in the organization. So that's how we see it. We don't see, it's a commentary on how do we meet AI, because it's always what we're helping clients do. Behavior drives outcomes. How are we meeting the current challenge? Are we meeting it in green or red? And you could say it's quintessentially the leadership challenge, because it's not the first crisis and it's not the last. But can we be in the green? Can we meet that crisis in the most deliberate, constructive way? That's the question we help clients work with.
There's an added element here. Our next gathering as this one, what we're calling our EEs, will be next month on AI and how it's impacting leaders and organizations. So we have our friend Niccolo Bernardo, who will be with us. So we'll be addressing that even further. We'll try to tie it to what we just talked about tonight as well. And I just endorse what Michael's saying. I think it'll be beyond the IT. It'll go beyond the IT firms. We're working with retail a lot these days and a whole bunch of other kind of companies, including pharmaceuticals. And it's just become an accelerator to change. So what happens with accelerated change, accelerated hijack brains? People are increasingly in their red zone, and hence the whole organization becomes short-term focused and it's losing its ability to navigate the complexity. So we're in a very, very delicate point in history, in my opinion, in organizations. Michael and I are working with executive teams, and I've been working with them for a long time. They used to have time to think. We used to have 2-3 day strategic offsites. They don't have time anymore. They're always going from urgency to urgency. They're red brain or stuck in the red brain mode. And without the insights and without the tools to help them see what's going on, and then the processes to get unstuck from that, organizations are going to be challenged in years to come because they're all short-term focused because of the red brain, because of that red zone.
It's also worth saying on a side note, we of course are embracing AI ourselves. So we are. It's been an incredibly arduous process of training AI to read our assessment reports, so that we now are making those available to the coach. But we still want the coach. We don't want the client. We don't want to rob the client of doing the work. So AI can be, and it can work against the person's growth journey, right? So what we are currently doing is we make the AI report, which is an interpretation, a summary of their actual assessment report, available to the coach, not to the client. And then the coach can then summarize, edit they wish as they work with the client. So yes, we're still doing the AI, but I think it's a really important thing is to put the AI in the right place, which is what we're also doing.
This will be what we'll be talking about next month, is how to put AI in the right place, because it truly does augment our capacities. It's augmenting mine as a therapist and as a coach, and it will augment leadership capabilities. So we need to learn how to use it. So great question. Tune in next month on that one. We would have time for one more question if there are any.
So once you've gone through this whole 360 process and whether it's the person or the organization or the team has been given the result. So how do you ensure that these people don't get lost in their ambition to get quickly on the hammer wheel just to drive the results? Transformation takes time, and I think we are never done. We are never done. So how do you make that accessible and to create that space where people are human beings and they will make mistakes and they will rise and fall and get all messy and and start over again, and
we through a period of rituals over anything between 9 and 36 months, there's a regularity through the simplicity of the practice itself, that the change practice is very simple. It's sophisticated yet simple and well crafted. And we use a pulse survey system, Deb, where that we ask their teams that are around them to survey them every 2 weeks on their practice. We have a leaderboard system if they're a cohort, so it shows you who's leading the change, the growth, who's improved the most. It's gamification of it, but it creates real accountability. And interestingly enough, Deb, within that flow, we see exactly what you've talked about. Someone starts practicing, they fall off. The pulse survey picks it all up, and the ritualizing of the check-ins and how we're traveling and the feedback, and it accommodates that very human journey, but it also accommodates accountability. Like, there's still pressure in this. There has to be pressure. Doing the assessment's not enough. We have to be able to do the work over time with a degree of tolerance. And what we're mainly looking for is steady improvement, right? It's okay if we go backwards, but we're trending and improving, and there's a maturity to that built into the survey system so that we can acknowledge. And I often say, this is how we word it with CEOs, is that person's behavior at the level you need it to be? Is that person's competence at the level you need to be? If it's not, are they defensive? No, good, then we can develop. If they are defensive, probably not going to get anywhere. Now, what's most important is that they're progressively changing. That's the most important thing, not that they're perfect, because we know that's not possible. And that's how we tend to handle that.
Thanks for showing up. Hoping to see you next month.